I'll start recording anyway.
You got it. I got it. Let me find my screen. Actually, let me share my desktop.
You found you showed me the slides, right? You found very, very nice pictures of Cohen. Really like it. I never saw his face, I think.
No, that's incredible. Okay, so today we are going to, so the plan, I guess we don't need any intro to the plan. The plan is for the next few sessions, we review some of the aspects of being an event and logics of words with some mathematical interludes between. This is the first presentation in that series where we dive into a little bit into the concept of generic and forcing in being an event. So Badiou in being an event, about 1/3 of the book, he actually does a detailed presentation of constructivism, of method of the concept of generic and method of forcing and independence of continuous hypothesis. So this is just a very condensed presentation of what Badiou has presented. I actually wrote that in my dissertation. So I had very little time to prepare this presentation. So I basically went through my notes from my dissertation and extracted from them, which themselves were like just reading. And now it was like a few years ago when I was going through them, there were some questions. So we have to explore them together, hopefully. So you guys can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first thing about Badiou's presentation is his motive for even discussing generic, and that is, in general, Badiou thinks the science of being is actually has revamped by Cantor. If you want to really distill this revolution from all the discourses before Cantor and all the discourses after Cantor, is basically the ability to talk about being quantitatively as opposed to qualitatively. Everything that was that science of being qua being since Aristotle till Husserl and Heidegger has the main focus was on what is being, not so much how many of beings we have. This is very important to Badiou because Cantor provided this ability to think quantitatively about being, about multiples and multiples of multiples and things like that. And in that sense, he thinks that discussion opened up the main enigma within being, which is basically an errancy he refers to in ontology. He thinks that basically the crux of this enigma in science of being comes back to the difference of omega 0 and power set of omega 0. One being the basis of arithmetic, the other one being the basis of geometry. And the enigma that was embedded in this, obviously, was present to everybody, all the philosophers since Plato and Aristotle, but they didn't have a way to think about it consistently or effectively before Cantor. And he thinks that this is being possible by him. So basically, and what it says is that this difference between omega naught and p omega naught is distilled in the problem of continuous hypothesis. So as you may know, continuous hypothesis basically says that, yes, we admit that the power set of omega naught is greater than omega naught, but by how much? There are two answers to this, that this by how much is a measurable how much. We can say by how much it is bigger. And basically this how much is that the power set of omega naught is omega 1, the next cardinal, the list of infinity. So the first one is omega naught, and the next one is omega 1. And there are no other cardinals in between. The other approach basically says that this difference is unknown. So power set of omega naught may be omega, in this language, omega alpha. And there may be infinitely many cardinals between omega naught and the cardinality of power set omega naught. So this being a very nightmarish thing for Cantor, he created this hypothesis that yes, this difference is measurable. So the increase of infinities by applying power set over infinite sets starting at the first ordinal is a stepwise approach. We go one by one. And he stated that as a hypothesis. Obviously, he couldn't prove it. This hypothesis has never been proved. What has happened is that about 30, 40 years after, Kurt Gödel, basically, and another constructivist who firmly believed that it should be measurable, the difference should be measurable, proved that if we actually add that as an axiom to ZFC, we can show that addition of that axiom does not disturb ZFC. So Gödel proved that continuous hypothesis, he didn't prove continuous hypothesis, but proved that continuous hypothesis is consistent with CH. The general form of continuous hypothesis is this, that any power set of any cardinal or what we call limit ordinal is actually the successor of that limit ordinal. That's the actual continuous hypothesis. Basically state this, that the power set of a given limit ordinal is the next limit ordinal. So we briefly overview constructivism. This is one of the pictures that Gabriel likes. So basically, constructivism is an approach that at the bottom of it has this axiom of constructibility. But there is a whole method into constructivism. And the method is that we basically, the Achilles heel in the whole business of not being able to measure the difference between an infinite ordinal and its power set is because we let, if you will, I mean, this lack of an accurate expression, we let the power set to go too wild. If we are able to limit the construction of, limit the elements within the power set of any set to a definable element, then we can say that that definable, sorry, not definable, definable universe, then that definable universe is measurably more populated. You have a universe L alpha at some level, very similar to how von Neumann defined the universes. But this is a twist on that, where if you have at a level a universe called L alpha, then the next, or L beta, I should say, the next level of the universe, which is usually defined as the power set of the universe beta, is constructed through a certain set of operations that follow these principles. All the universal quantifiers take the elements from universe beta. All the existential quantifiers take their, which is normal thing we would assume, and all the parameters take the elements from the word beta. Ability to define that universe, he calls it a definable universe, which is something like right here. And then the difference between von Neumann operation and constructible operation is that the successor universe of alpha is the definable part of the original universe. That's the main thinking. That's the main method. So that is fine. A non-constructivist mathematician would say it's very fine to create universes according to this method. We call them L's in comparison to V's, which is the way that you refer to von Neumann universes. But the point is that L is a subset of V. And the constructibility axiom basically says L is equal to V. And we show the consistency. This axiom, if the model for the universe is a universe such as L, we show that this model is consistent with Z of C plus this axiom.
Can we just pause for a second? So
yeah.
Just to summarize, so what in the previous slide, we have this these levels, and each level is constructed from the previous one, and then we have this concept of definable parts, right? So you have level 0 is just the empty set. Level 1, the set containing the empty set. Level 2, yeah, and then you have like the von Neumann thing with empty and the set containing the empty set, and so on, right? So then
which is the power set of the empty set. Exactly,
the power set of the empty set, exactly.
So von Neumann is it's just defining each level to contain the power set of the previous level. The only that constructivists have is that we don't just say that, we basically only accept those elements within the power set that we can actually reference within the original. And how they do that is what Badiou is presenting in the next sections. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so you're going to talk about this definability in the next
I think
section.
so.
Because I think, if I understood correctly, that it's almost like generalizing a property of the finite to the infinite, right? Because when you're talking about finite sets, it's true that everything that is in the power set can be directly defined. The thing becomes weird, like you call it the definable part as something that might not coincide with the parts. The moment that you're talking about infinite sets, you took the power set operation. You're talking about the sets of parts of something infinite, but you're not really. How are you sure of what's inside of it, right? And you're saying, and the question is, well, can I use that sort of nominalist approach to sets, right? That I take the set with one thing to be a set plus, like to be the set with nothing plus its name, right? As Badiou says, right? Or like 2 is 1 plus a set of 1, something like that, right? All that is inside is the things you already defined prior to that. So it seems to me that it's almost like extending that strategy to the infinite sets as well. Like, is it possible to say that there's only definable parts inside of an infinite set, in an infinite power set? Isn't it kind of like taking something which is verifiable in the finite and just making it into a more prescriptive condition for the infinite? Not sure if that makes sense.
Actually, I'm not sure if Badiou talks about that at all. because the rest of, at least, or what I have captured, is about the consistency of what this axiom with the rest of ZFC. But I think the question is that, Dennis is asking is, if we call definable parts of the power set of omega naught, how does this definability, like what is this operation of definability? Is that right, Clarence?
Yeah, exactly. What is definability? I mean, I think in the slides and previously you did, this slide, yeah, you did mention that it is in the sense of quantifiers and parameters. So like in the sense of you can create a formula using these symbols, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
For that part. Right?
Yeah, from what I understand, it means that if whatever is inside that set can be attached to a formula that would extract it, a well-formed formula that was
from the previous level, like so.
From the previous level, exactly.
Yeah, L alpha, and now you want to make L alpha plus 1, then you need to have formulas for to be a bridge to carry the contents from L alpha into L alpha plus 1.
Yeah, I think like fast forwarding a lot to how Cohen did his extension of S to S of G. I think I have not seen the details of Gödel's proof or Cohen's proof for that matter. My knowledge is bounded by what Badiou has presented here, which I suppose has heavy filters in terms of the actual discussion. So I'm not assuming what he says is what is in proofs in Cohen or Gödel respectively. It may be, but I just don't assume that. But according to what Badiou presents, I think it looks like Cohen is following a technique in order to extend S just by relying only on the elements of S. But he's creating names, because the actual elements we don't know, but he creates, Cohen seems to create names that basically are a lot more numerous than S and are not in S, but only by relying what is in S. So following that example that we hopefully will see later on in this talk, you can assume that these sets, point toward the same direction, that you always start with your existing universe, right? And from this existing universe, you try to project what is in the successor universe. And one of the methods to do that is like how Cohen did this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and just like the V equal L hypothesis, it's basically saying like the infinite is only definable, right? Like there's nothing in the infinite that's not definable.
Exactly. There's nothing. Well, I don't think Gödel is actually saying that they are actually equal. He's saying that I am going to assume they are equal, and I show this assumption that they are equal is not going to disturb ZFC.
Okay, yeah, yes, this is enough to do ZFC stuff.
But one thing that I like about asking the question Dennis asking, what you're saying, Raz, which I think is useful for us more generally, is because, and this is clearer, I mean, from the very, very, very basic operation, right? When you have a set, like with 3 things, and you take its power set, which has 8 things, the basic intuition that Badiou explores a lot in being an event at the beginning is that the relation between these 2 sets is also the basic relation of representation, because for any function you choose, for any well-formed statement you choose about those 3 elements, the answer is one of the parts in the power set, right? So if I have three things and I ask questions about that domain, the answer will be none, one, two, or three, or two of them coupled together, or all of them. There's no other option. So when you talk about the relation between sets and power sets, there is a, since that's a definition of a function, right? What is taken in the set, and if it gives you like the set, and if you extract some part of it out of it, that's like naming something in it or representing a part of it or the whole of it or something like this. It really makes clear, like when you take that position, that there is a very strong question concerning language in these different orientations, right? So how you should control your language in order to navigate an infinite situation, right? That's what's at stake also, I mean, philosophically, in the issue of, okay, three elements have a power set of 8 parts. How about an infinite set? How many parts does that have, right? You can translate that into a question of what does it mean? What are the possibilities for representation for infinite things, right? So constructibility can be translated, and Badiou does do this, right, in terms of a theory of language, a theory of representation, right, where it's saying something like, yeah, you can't really have questions that are answered about the infinite if it doesn't respect some sort of delimitation structure. Otherwise, you don't know what you're quantifying over or what existence means, right? It has a model theoretic interpretation in that sense, right?
Exactly. That is exactly what I was thinking. That in some sense, maybe even this statement, the axiom of infinity simply says L is equal to V, is maybe a little bit misleading in terms of an ontological principle that we are saying that two infinities are equal to each other. That is not really what Gödel or constructibility wants to do. Basically, constructibility wants to say that if we had a constructible universe in the manner that we just spoke, that could be a sufficient model for ZFC. That is what it's saying. I mean, we don't need to have V for doing that. If we did that, CH, that axiom basically is a model of ZFC, which is a model theoretical way. And because nobody really knows what L and V is. Nobody really knows what they are. What they are is, and I think going back to what Badiou means by quantifiers and quantification, what they are really don't matter what they are, because we cannot define them in terms of qualities. What we want to know is whether they have excesses beyond measure or not, which is a new register of thinking about them. So this equality here is not of qualitative type, if what I'm saying makes sense.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and I was reading today on this, and the author was commenting that Gödel has a syntactical strategy to prove consistency, which is he's showing that there is no contradiction. That's his main idea, right? But you cannot, what Cohen will do is actually to give a more semantic version, because he's going to show that there is a model. But there is a semantic interpretation for constructibility. It is saying everything that is sayable about V is sayable in a constructive universe, right? So you can take it from the semantic point of view. Like, look, if we restrict language to say that there is no reference to a name, if that referent cannot be treated as a definable property, it's self-extracted from a hierarchy of construction, right? If I cannot construct the referent by extracting it through a formula from a set, it's not a well-formed, defined part of the world, right? He's saying that, well, if you do this, you can still say everything there is to say about V. So there is a sort of how would you put it, like it's stressing that a controlled theory of representation is potent enough, right, to navigate this universe.
So should I continue?
Sure.
So in this, so again, the whole point is that if we say L is a universe like this, the point is to show L is a model of ZFC. This means that the other 7 axioms are consistent within this model, which means that they are consistent with this axiom of constructibility. And every multiple is constructible within the constructible universe. That is, for all omegas, there exists an alpha where omega belongs to L of that, the universe of that ordinal. And that's a theorem. So there are some sketches of Gödel's proof. The success of the constructibility axiom relies on 2 moves. The axiom restricts the domain of input to exclude anything that is not from an already programmatically constructed domain. The exclusive move builds a model for all relevant axioms that comprise only a constructible universe. And then the proof only has to show that every multiple in such a model is constructible. It is important to realize this, it is solely based on the only that every will work. Cohen adopted the exclusiveness of the model, and within that model, he showed that not every multiple is constructible. We can condition a multiple in a way such that it cannot belong to the constructible ground model, which we will see later. Badiou provides a description of Gödel's proof as follows. Let's agree to notate the formula F that is relativized according to exclusiveness condition as the following. The constructible concept of F would be FL of beta. We say the universe at beta level, if such a universe exists, we can say that within that universe, F of beta is the same as if it exists, then FL beta exists, then F is absolute, or FB is equal to constructible, F constructible in that universe. That is, F yields the same result with or without exclusive condition as it is running in the model that preserves the consistency of the axioms. The example Badiou gives for an abstract formula is the union operation. So the point is that the exclusivity or restriction does not affect the truth value of the absolute. The proof then consists of showing that the concept of the constructible hierarchy is absolute for the constructible universe. In that sense, taking the constructible universe L as the formula, we want to show the formula is absolute. That is, L alpha implies that if L alpha, if there is L alpha, then L constructible alpha also exists. But you gives the following schema for the proof. It will be necessary to scrutinize exactly what a restricted formula is, to decompose it into elementary set operations in finite numbers, the Gödel operation, then to show that each of these operations is absolute for the constructible universe. It will then be established that the function which maps the correspondence to each ordinal alpha of the L alpha is itself absolute for the constructible universe. We will then be able to conclude that the statement every multiple is constructible relativized to the constructible universe is true, or that every constructible set is constructively constructed. Moving on. So to show continuous hypothesis from this result, we need to show that omega alpha implies the cardinality of the universe, which is power set of alpha, is equal to the universe that omega alpha belongs to implies that the universe that power set of omega alpha belongs to is equal to the universe, is the same universe as the universe that is the successor of alpha. So if alpha is an ordinal, the power set of omega, which is the general form of the continuous hypothesis, the power set of the ordinal, limit ordinal at ordinal alpha is the same as the successor limit ordinal.
Right, so isn't it saying if you have this set called omega alpha, which is an infinite set, you put it inside this, I mean, if you say it exists inside the definable universe, that implies that the power set of that object within this universe has a cardinality, which is just the successor ordinal of that object. So like
so power set of omega naught is omega 1.
Okay.
But within that constructible, within that axiom of constructibility, this means that this operation is true by considering the axiom of constructibility.
Yeah, within the model.
Within the model. So his presentation goes that the first step is to show that the size of the constructible universe at ordinal alpha is the cardinality of alpha, ordinal alpha. This means that the cardinality of an infinite level of a constructible hierarchy is the same as the cardinality of its ordinal index. Take an ordinal omega alpha, we know from the previous result that this is true, right? Means that the cardinality of the universe at the level of ordinal W sub alpha is omega sub alpha. And the cardinality of this universe is
the successor of it, right?
Successor. Note that between these two ordinals, these two universes, there are infinitely many levels. This is because omega alpha and omega and successor of omega alpha are two limit ordinals or cardinals, and there are infinitely many other successor ordinals between these two limit ordinals. In particular, what should come after universe of omega is, so basically what it says that between these two, there are infinitely many universes because successor of omega alpha, successor of omega alpha is S of omega alpha, whereas this is the successor of alpha. You see the difference, right? So each infinite, like any regular number, successor operation of 1, 2, 3. These are each number is the successor of the previous one, right? But successor of omega naught is not omega 1. The successor of omega naught is another infinity, which itself is not a limit ordinal. It's just a successor ordinal. So what is the next limit ordinal is omega 1, which is the successor of 0. So when you say omega naught, S of omega naught, if I had the pen, I don't know how to use it, but S of omega naught is not omega 1. It's just another infinite number. It's called the successor ordinal. Omega 1, which is omega of S0, is the next limit ordinal. So there is a difference between successor ordinal and limit ordinal.
Yeah, is it like the difference between an infinity plus 1 and power set of infinity? Something
like that. Well, power set of infinity is, according to Bayou and Cohen, is just a wild number. We don't even know if it's a successor, if it is the next cardinal or next limit ordinal. We don't know anything about it, and that's the whole errancy. But the point is if you get omega, right, and you say what is the successor of omega, is another infinite number, right? But all the successors of omega naught, they have the same cardinality as omega naught till they don't have the same cardinality. When they don't have the same cardinality, which is omega 1, then omega 1 is infinitely, so there is no successor before omega 1 that has the same cardinality as omega 1. That's the difference.
Okay, yeah, because we don't want to assume that the power set is how you get
to the next,
exactly,
to the next one. So let's just say there is such a thing as omega 1. Can we characterize it without reference to power set or anything? Omega 1 is just the thing that you cannot get to it by succession. Sorry, can I get to omega 1 through successions of omega 0?
Right. So say it in another way, exactly what you said. Say it in another way is, Cantor proved at least the existence of another cardinal, which is the power set of Aleph. Now the difference is that another cardinal is immeasurable by Aleph. So Aleph 1, and he called it Aleph 1. So Aleph 1 is another limit ordinal. But there are infinitely many infinite numbers between Aleph 1 and Aleph naught, right? So we don't know what the successor of Aleph naught is. We don't even know whether power set of Aleph naught is Aleph 1. It's just the name Aleph 1. But what we know is that there are two levels of infinity that are not measurable with each other. Now, if you take a power set of Aleph 1 and you say it is Aleph n, whatever that Aleph is, then you get another cardinal. So basically, we have one operation within the set theory that creates cardinal numbers, according to what Cantor proved. And these cardinal numbers are cardinal numbers that are not measurable by any sizes below themselves. Whereas a successor ordinal does not change the cardinality. So basically, a long story short, a successor ordinal is an ordinal, but it's not a cardinal. Whereas this is a cardinal. This value is a cardinal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the vertical bars, right, make it a
The vertical bars make it the cardinality, but the point, the difference is between that was not what I wanted to. So if you sorry, again, I don't have. Let's see if I can bring up a text editor. Not here. How do you write?
Yeah, you can also use the annotate in the in Zoom, in the view options, or I don't know if you have the thing at the top that says view options. It says annotate, right? Should be inside Zoom.
Let me see if I can write it here.
Oh yeah, you do that too.
If you have a number, say A, right, and you say cardinality of A, this may become a number, say N, right? And if you say the cardinality, if you say what is the S of A, and you say S of A is equal to B, right? And then what is the cardinality of B? The value is that the answer is that the cardinality of B is also N. That is, a successor ordinal does not change the cardinality, it's the same.
For infinite, right? But
for infinite.
Yeah, for infinite. So if alpha if A and B are infinites, then the cardinality of these two don't change. But if you have, so the first one is omega naught, right? Now the successor of omega naught. So we know the cardinality of omega naught is a certain value, is omega naught in this case, right? What is the cardinality of the successor of omega naught? The answer is it's still omega naught. Now, how do we get to the next cardinal? So this is called the successor ordinal. The way that we get or showed the next ordinal is by showing omega of S naught, which is omega 1. This is different than this.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, this is the next cardinal. So what this formula, coming back to this formula actually, and all von Neumann universes work the same way. So that part of the constructible universe, I don't think changes that fact, is saying that the size of this universe, which is omega 1, and the size of this universe is omega, exactly like this, omega successor of the next limit ordinal. But the size of this universe is the same as omega at alpha, this universe. Because this value does not change the cardinality. This is the successor ordinal. Anyway, what is the importance of this? We know omega alpha or omega A is an element of the universe of omega of the next cardinal, the next limit ordinal. and omega alpha is a subset of the universe at omega alpha, which means that its parts are definable in that hierarchy, which means that its parts will belong to the hierarchy of next limit ordinal. This should be only one S here. So the fundamental idea of the proof is exactly to show that all parts of omega alpha are exhausted by this universe, which is the universe of the cardinality of the next ordinal limit to omega alpha. Now, to show that, we know that the power set of omega alpha is a subset of the universe at this next ordinal level. This is already an assumption. I think non-constructible folks agree with that too. Which means that the cardinal of the power set of omega alpha is less than or equal the cardinality of the next level universe, or the universe at the next limit ordinal. And that means that cardinality of, because we know the cardinality of this is omega next limit ordinal, omega S alpha, then the cardinality of P of omega, omega alpha is less than or equal to this large infinite value. But since the cardinality of the universe that omega alpha is at the level of omega alpha is omega alpha, and the cardinality of omega alpha is less than cardinality of S alpha, we conclude that the cardinality of this universe is equal to the cardinality of omega alpha. Wait, did I get that right?
Well, yeah. So earlier you said the power set of omega alpha is a subset of the next universe, right?
Yeah.
This L omega successor alpha. So now you're saying we can imply at the end that the cardinality of the power set. So yeah, how can the cardinality, how can this power set be a subset, and at the same time its cardinality is the same as
So the
cardinality of that universe?
Right. Okay. So we understand this, right? This is a result of this.
Mhm.
Yeah, that one makes sense. Yeah, if you're a subset of something, then your cardinality must be smaller than that thing that you're
Now,
a subset of.
let me understand what this piece is. That so we understand this as well, because this is the same as this. Same as this. The part that I'm not understanding is this part. No, this is also true. But this part is, this conclusion from this implication it escapes me right now. Oh, okay. Okay. This is this because is important here, right? So if we are saying that this value, like what we actually, the importance of this is exactly what we talked about here, right? There is no cardinal. So none of the numbers, none of these successors of omega 1, omega naught is greater than omega naught. None of the successors of, until you reach the limit ordinal. Until you reach the limit ordinal, until you reach the continuum or continuous or continuum, or actually in this case, rational numbers, irrational numbers. Unless you reach irrational numbers, all other infinities are denumerable. They are equal to aleph naught. So how is the are rational numbers, the cardinality of rational numbers greater than integers? The answer is no. That means that there is no size, there is no cardinal number between omega naught till you reach irrational numbers. True? You agree with that?
Yeah. If I keep adding ones, I'm still in the denumerable
Exactly.
universe. So
So the only time that I can express something like this, if I agree that these two are different cardinals, right?
yeah, I see. And the only other cardinal it could be
Is the successor,
the successor
cardinal,
right?
so, the limit ordinal, the next limit ordinal.
If I'm understanding correctly, the gist of the strategy is to associate a rank to the successor rather than to the power set operation.
Yeah, so the gist of the operation here is to recognize between a successor ordinal and a limit ordinal. That's the,
because
that's
the
the
successor, yeah, the successor will be larger, but it's not immeasurably larger because the cardinality was preserved. So I get to say that I can state that inclusion relation without saying, okay, but now I open the doors to something I cannot measure.
yeah, so this is really a screwy part of the infinity discussions. There is something called an ordinal and something called a cardinal. When you get beyond aleph naught or omega naught, you have ordinals greater than omega naught. But unless you reach a limit ordinal or another cardinal, which is the like I said, Cantor discovered, that is power set of omega naught, all these successor ordinals have the same cardinality. They have elements within them. So say successor of omega naught certainly has elements within it that is not in omega naught. But the cardinality of successor of omega naught is the same as omega naught. The same as integers and ratios. We know that 1/3 is not in integers, is not an integer. So we know rationals contain elements that are not in integers, but the cardinality of rationals is the same as integers.
Yeah.
And unless you reach to irrational numbers, and we didn't even know that irrational numbers have a different cardinality. It was Cantor who showed, oh, wait a minute. Now we are talking about a different size. The size before this was all the same.
Yeah.
So cardinals are hard to come by. Successor ordinals is just an operation, a pan operation.
Yeah, so just to try to go back always to the sort of more the more conceptual basis of these proofs and these ideas. It seems that there are three things that are like constitutive to this. One, which I think it's a more profound underlying issue that we should comment at some point, but that what you're saying makes very clear, which is when we say that there is a quantitative approach to being, quantitative doesn't mean anything like what we're used to think it means.
Exactly.
Because, for example, the moment that when you're at the level of infinities, ordinals and cardinals mean different things, and that's not something that's intuitive at all, right? That quantity of size and order of, let's say, hierarchy of succession, they become decoupled, because you can have successions, right, that you can continue to grow ordinally and say that something is succeeding something else, and quantitatively things remain the same.
Exactly.
So it's almost like we get a purer concept of quantity when cardinality becomes decoupled from a more regular finite sense, right? So that seems to be point one for both Cohen and Cantor. That's and Cohen and Gödel. That's, let's say, directly being mobilized in these groups. The second thing is that it seems like Gödel was very sensitive, like had a lot of clarity about the expressive role of hierarchy in von Neumann universe, right? Meaning that you can construct numbers via this accumulative inductive structure. He realized that transfinite induction, like taking this over to infinities, is also taking to infinities a certain way of representing, right? Because the whole definable condition that says you can only use predicates that are parameterized in lower levels, right? So this hierarchy is telling me how to construct names for new things. I cannot define things that are not quantified in a simpler level than the level I'm describing, right? So it seems like he's very, and I think that what you emphasize is this, that there is it's a way of looking at sets and power sets and being very clear that these functions between these things, they are predicates. They are, let's say, fundamental to discussing what you quantify over, and depending on how you construct the next set, those properties, that kind of mini theory of language will carry over or not, right? So we know that for von Neumann's accumulative creation of empty set, and the set that contains the empty set, and the set that contains the empty set, and that other set, you go this way, you get for free the means to talk about stuff, because every new thing can be named by the things that you had before. So that's kind of an additional property you're getting for free when you construct new sets out of simpler sets. That, well, if the new set is constructed out of previous sets, then you have the names of the new set in the previous sets, right? That's, let's say, an intuition about where your linguistic powers will come from. And it seems to me that Gödel is saying, well, I can come up with a version of that strategy for infinite quantities as well. I can also make sure that I'm carrying over the power to name this larger sets from the previous ones, right? So the simpler gives the name of the more complex. I always quantify and find the predicates that are defined on the simpler, and then I use this to show that the more complex exists.
Exactly. I think you nailed it by saying decoupling size and order. You still have well-ordering in sets, in successor ordinals. So there is such a thing as a set omega naught is not the same as set omega 1. And you can even say that there is a sense of ordering between the two. But this ordering is not, that successor of omega naught is greater in size than omega naught.
Yeah. And I think that this is the point, like just a third point that it seems to be conceptually crucial to the strategy is to realize that for von Neumann, it's the successor that is preserving your capacity to speak across this cumulative hierarchy. So if we are able to define the largest through the successor, not through the limit ordinal, we'll be able to do so while preserving our expressive powers, which is what we're looking for, to show that this smaller model will be able to speak about everything that is there.
Mm-hmm. So as a matter of fact, this is partially what Cohen did.
And the reason why I'm framing it in this way is because I think it will help to show that it's implicit in the technique of forcing that language is not that, right? That language can function in a different way other than naming the complex through the simple, which I think also clarifies why that Robert Rosen text we read is also about genericity. And the guy was saying, look, you want to study complex objects like living creatures, you don't need to go to the simpler parts to get to the whole. There are ways of perturbing or accessing something complex that take the complex itself to be the reference, which I think is something that we're going to see that it's part of what the forcing technique does in terms of how it expresses properties of an already dense subset, right? It's not trying to construct it bit by bit all the way to the whole, right? It will extract information out of the generic subset itself. So there is a complexity version of this argument, where the constructive is more analytic in the sense that the simpler explains the complex, and the generic is something that accepts that the complex can be the proper referent of a name.
Okay, so let's move.
I might be forcing it here in the non-technical sense, but
let's go through this. Probably we can get to the forcing a little bit. I didn't know that Paul Cohen got a medal from Johnson. So I think like what we talked about, Cohen was interested to show, I think that the clue, again, I haven't, but going through this in my mind, I think the clue that Cohen had was that, wait a minute, the same constructibility principles that Gödel had, we can use to show that there are non-constructible elements. So elements that are understandable or thinkable, but not expressible in the language. But he basically, the effectiveness of his method is that he followed the same principle of definable. So he was very careful, or at least the way that Badiou shows, is a careful sequence of defining what this generic is without being able to fully construct it. So
yeah, but when you say it's similar strategy, I mean, I think that's why I'm emphasizing this definability. That's why I think we should talk about it in Gödel, because one thing is to define parts based on the simpler levels of a hierarchy and say you can only quantify, make statements based on the previous level, right? And the whole thing with conditions is a different strategy for defining the parts that you can combine later on, right? It's not inductive.
No, it's not. But at the same time, I think that's the maybe that emphasizes the difference. The whole point, especially, we will see that Badiou is juxtaposing two roles throughout the proof. One is the role of the ontologist, the other one is the role of the inhabited. So he's saying that there is a way for us to know that generic does exist, but this is the ontologist who knows that it exists. In order for the ontologist to show the existence of the generic set, and thereby the generic extension of the ground model, he has to be able to define this generic set in ways that is seeable, visible to the inhabitants, without fully being able to construct it. So there is a slight difference between definability and constructibility, right? So you can take you can build the concept for sure, so it is thinkable, but at the same time, you can show the inhabitants that it is possible to name this generic set without knowing what is inside it. So I think the fact that he's so careful to rely on the resources of the smaller set, the ground model, in order to show something that is completely not constructible, but still definable, I find it very amazing.
Yeah, I agree. Otherwise, it would look like, I mean, I think you're totally right, because the simpler understanding of this is something like, well, you can, from outside of this universe, outside of its expressive power, shows that it exists. Therefore, it's a matter of faith. That would be the interpretation. And that's not why he uses the idea of fidelity, right? So it has nothing to do with the idea that the best I can do is I believe something more is possible. And well, ontology shows it is. He goes he shows that Cohen goes through the trouble of showing how much added information is seeable and expressible within the situation, right? Not without.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I wanted to say something. I forgot to mention something important, but it will come to me. So the generic is, for Cohen, is just the opposite thing. He wants to show that ZFC plus CH is consistent. That is, Gödel showed that ZFC plus CH is consistent. That is, it has a ground model. Cohen's proof is to show ZFC plus not CH is consistent in some model that is a subset of von Neumann universe. Cohen's proof takes place in a much smaller model that is semi-veridical of quasi-complete, wherein a certain subset of ZFC axioms are veridical, as we shall see shortly. But you call this model S. If we denote as SG, read as the generic extension of S, the model in which ZFC not CH consists, then we can state the strategy of Cohen's proof is the following, that if S exists, then SG exists, without fully being able to define what SG is. The term generic in Cohen's language in Badiou's appropriation of this term is the same as indiscernible, and by that it means that which is subtracted of any nomination. Now the interesting thing is that we actually end up doing nomination. Everything in SG has nomination. Or actually, no, I shouldn't say that. Badiou, or at least the proof that Badiou shows here, says that G is fully nominable, and everything that is in S is fully nominable. But whether or not all SG is nominable or not is a different story. We'll see that. We will assume a denumerable multiple with the following two properties. Very rich in properties, it reflects a significant part of general ontology. Very poor in quantity, it is denumerable. We will term this multiple a fundamental quasi-complete situation or a ground model, and we'll name it as S. We note that S is not only a model for ZFC, but also a submodel of the constructible universe L. That means the axiom of constructibility must be veridical in S. The strategy is to show that in S, we can approximate a set G that is unnameable within S. This strategy consists of 3 parts to prove that such a G could exist based on what we know of S. And you have to remember that G will not be an element of S, does not belong to S. That's why G is not visible to the inhabitant. A way of being able to name this G without knowing what it is or without being able to fully construct it, and a way to expand S such that it can now name G. G is a multiple that contains elements of S, cannot be constructed directly. The procedure is thus to condition the multiple G using the elements of S in a manner that is sufficient to conclude that the multiple thus condition cannot be named or discerned in S. The elements of the base multiple chosen in S will be called conditions for G. Despite all conditions that condition G belongs to S, G itself doesn't belong to S. The next move is a way to expand S to SG such that G belongs to SG. This is Cohen's forcing technique. The idea is then while ZFC plus CH is veridical in S, ZFC plus not CH is veridical in SG. So everything that the concept of generic and then extension and then forcing is all to show that not CH is a statement that is undecidable in S, or is not true in S, is true in SG. During the conditioning of G, we get enough information about G such that it is possible to show that CH is untrue in SG. Cohen called G a generic filter as opposed to a set. While filter does not allow us to clearly see inside of G, it is non-constructible. We can get enough information about what is inside so we can have enough information for the new model. Cohen's strategy is constructible, is construction of a new model in general, and this method can be used for many results other than continuum hypothesis. The general strategy can summarize as following. Given a particular proposition P that has veracity in S, we can build another model from S such that we are able to force not P. This is performed by creating a generic filter G. By the nature of this generic filter, or the genesis will depend on the nature of the proposition that we are refuting. Cohen built one of these filters, which is specific to the proposition of CH. We can summarize Cohen's strategy as such. We need to show that generic filter G always exists. This is Razyova-Sikorsky lemma, which does not belong to S in discernibility theorem. Through the way in which we condition G, we need to show that the veracity in SG is completely determined by G, forcing theorem. Furthermore, the performing of this veracity, the process of determining truth in SG, can be wholly performed in S based on the conditioning of G and the information that we can gather through its conditions, local definability of forcing theorem. And finally, we need to show that SG, a model acquired by adding G to S, is a model of ZFC, generic model theorem. So starting from the ground model, Badiou calls S the ground model, quasi-complete situation, which has the following properties. S verifies all the axioms of set theory, which are these axioms that he says we need: extensionality, union parts, the void, infinity, choice, and foundation. S verifies at least a finite number of instances of those axioms, which can only be expressed by an infinite series of formula, that is separation and replacement, since there is actually a distinct axiom of separation for every formula lambda alpha, and an axiom of replacement for every lambda alpha beta, which indicates that alpha is replaced by beta. S is transitive. That is very important. But S is not an ordinal. So it's not like omega naught. So it contains everything that its elements contains, but its elements don't have to be transitive. That's very important. For reasons which will turn out to be decisive later on, we will add S is infinite, but denumerably infinite. Again, it's important because he needs to show that induction works on this. Quasi-complete apparently is the best we can hope for a model, since otherwise we would have consistency and completeness together, which is impossible according to Godel.
Just to clarify, completeness means every proposition is either provably true or provably false, right?
Exactly.
So quasi means we are allowing the possibility that there are true statements that are not provable.
Yeah, undecidable.
Undecided. Okay.
Yeah. S being transitive means this, that everything that belongs to a member of S also is a member of S. That is, all elements of an element of S is also an element of S, but the following is not necessarily true for a transitive set. If something is a subset of alpha, it doesn't mean that it belongs to S. Right? So S, the inhabitant of S can see all the elements of S, but it cannot see all the subsets of the elements of S. Why? Because for the above to be true, must have the following. Right? In order for us to see it, that this has to be true, which means alpha is transitive, which is not the requirement for the quasi-complete ground model. That is, S is not an ordinal. This means that S is not close to power set operation. But you emphasizes on this point to distinguish between two perspectives, one of the inhabitants of the situation and the other, what he calls the ontologist. The inhabitant's perspective. Okay, so this is totally my interpretation in my dissertation, right? You guys know about this because you read it. But Badiou's a little bit more playful, and he basically talks about a position outside of the situation and a position inside the situation. So ontologist has the prophetic view. He has position. He looks at the situation from outside, which I think is more metaphorical than anything else.
Yeah, but I think it's also a way of distinguishing the language resources of the situation, right? You can, for example, state things when you, for example, can use second order logic. But if you can only use first order, there are some things you cannot say, right? So one thing is to.
It is more. It's actually the language that he's referring to. He's really referring to ontology, like the actual ability to see things.
Yeah.
So this is my interpretation. I said the inhabitant's perspective is the perspective that is circumscribed by the knowledge of the situation, what is discernible or has been named, but the knowledge of the situation. The ontologist, on the other hand, thinks the situation axiomatically. That is, she can think of the situation by extending it beyond the knowledge of the situation by manipulating the axioms of the situation.
Yeah, the way that I understood it, I think it's probably the same thing as you're saying, but I think the conceptual basis for this is on the specificity of the transitivity you mentioned above, right? For example, which I think we can translate in terms of something we were talking about in other times, because to say that the ground model is transitive is to say that, let's say, everything there is to see is seeable in it. But that doesn't mean you can see everything, right? Because elements are part of it. The elements internal to a part are in the ground model, but it doesn't mean you have the resources to take it as a part, right? So if parts are, let's say, Badiou's basic way of talking about things that can be the answer to a question, right? Parts is what you extract from sets. That means that every material of the situation is in the ground model, but that didn't make them referable necessarily from inside the situation, right? So everything is there, but you didn't necessarily gain more intelligibility of everything that is in the situation because the ground model is transitive.
Yeah. So when we get to a specific, I mean, there are operations that we perform in the proof, and Badiou is very careful to say which one is for the inhabitant and which one is for the ontologist. So let's talk about this. Let's come back to this and say, why do you think it is the ontologist, and what is it that the ontologist is doing here that inhabitant couldn't do? We recall that a part of theory is absolute if it is independent of the underlying model. In this case, the theory holds for both the. So there are parts of the theory that is absolute. Like, for example, what's a good example of absolute? So, like, for example, union operation is absolute. So both inhabitant and ontologist have access to this. There are other examples we see later. For an inhabitant of S, elements of S and elements of P of S, when S is transitive, are both absolute. But the elements of the power set of an element of S is not absolute.
Yes.
Because there are no resources in S that empowers the inhabitant of S to have this recognition. That's the difference between an ontologist and an inhabitant. This is also important for the general strategy of discernibility. Discernibility is from the perspective of an inhabitant only, which means that when we say G is indiscernible, we are saying it is indiscernible for an inhabitant of S. In addition, to be transitive, S is to be denumerable as well. While S's transitivity will help us to impose a certain architecture on G that is consequentially desirable, its denumerability would help with the proof of the existence of G. So, I mean, obviously this material is all scattered around in different meditations. So what I did while I was reading this for my dissertation, I organized them according to main concepts. So the main concept, the first one is obviously a partial order set. What do we mean when we say that G cannot be constructed by conditioned or partially constructed? It means that within S, we can find multiples we call conditions that by having them to also belong to G, we can get information about G from them. Therefore, a condition P is a multiple. We want the following, that P belongs to S and P belongs to G, and G is a subset of S. The next question is, how can P, which is a multiple, decimate information about another multiple? The idea is that a condition on its own does not carry information. It is in relation or in differentiation with other conditions that they carry information. This is similar to familiar theory of the signifiers. Their signification isn't in their identities, but in their relations.
And also, I think that this is where the different theory of language against the constructive comes in, because when he starts talking about, okay, let's define the origin of information in this new structure, and he starts from first a partially ordered set, which for us is very relevant because both sets are, let's say, the basic structure for us to get true propositions in logics of worlds, right? And for the whole thing about bodies and so on. So it's interesting that we find this lattice structure appearing here. And second, that it's rather than saying, well, if you can quantify over a lower hierarchy and define things properly there, you're good to go for the next hierarchy, and then you can construct and move inside the infinite in this way. He's saying that, look, you can indirectly organize information. You can extract information from the ordering of these conditions rather than from their inside, right? As I said, it's a differential thing. It's already different from Gödel here, right?
Yeah. The order relation is inclusion. Given P1 and P2, if P1 is included in P2, we say P2 is stronger than P1, pi 1, I should say, or else it carries more information than pi 1. We also say pi 2 dominates pi 1. Now let's C belonging to S be the partially ordered set of conditions. G is to be a part of C. So G is a subset of C. We can now make the following assertions in relation to the poset C. S is transitive means that statement A, C belongs to S, means that for all pi that belongs to C, that pi belongs to S, because S is transitive. And C belonging to S means that for all G subset of C, G is a subset of S. The partial ordering of conditions in C will mean this, that for all pi 1 and pi 2 belonging to C, if pi 2 dominates pi 1, or if pi 2, pi 1 is a subset of pi 2 dominates pi 1. Two conditions are compatible if they are both dominated by third condition for all pi 1. So I mean, this is the same as this. So I just read this. Every condition is dominated by two other conditions. So that's the expression. So that's what conditions are, and these are the four statements that are important, four properties that are important about conditions. We said filter and dense subsets. We said G being a subset of C, but G has properties that C doesn't have. G is a special type of poset that's called a filter that you call this correct subset. A filter is a kind of poset whose elements are all compatible. That is, if F is a filter whose P relation is inclusion, we state the following. F is a filter if and only if F is a subset of C, and if there are two conditions in F, we have either P1, pi 1 subset of pi 2, or pi 2 subset of pi 1. This is the definition of compatibility. That one thing has to be included in the other thing. If they don't have elements, it's called unrelated or incompatible. Similar to all posits, a filter has a weakest element, in this case, the empty set. In addition, if F is a filter, then it must satisfy the following two properties. property one is if pi2 is belongs to a filter and pi1 is a subset of pi2, then pi2 is belongs to a filter. Something that is included in pi2 is also a member of the filter. It is obvious that according to P1, empty set belongs to all filters because every condition dominates empty set. Proposition or property number two is if there are two conditions in filter F, and there is a condition that dominates both, then that the third condition also has to be part of that filter. It's obvious that P1 and P2 satisfy all the requirements A to D. Furthermore, it is obvious that they give way to the inhabitants conceptualization. Like all this is understandable by the inhabitant. The statement pi1 belonging to F means two things. First, that F presents pi1 material, and F is such that pi1 belongs to it, informational. Material and informational, two functions that are important in understanding F. These two functions are sutured together according to the requirements A to D. Moving on. So this is an example on page 363. Suppose that our conditions are finite series of zeros and ones, where empty set is actually the multiple 0 and 1 is a multiple of the set of set containing or including also containing empty set. For example, a condition could be 0, 1, 0 and another be 0, 0, 1. We know by the absoluteness principle that all finite elements, such as the ones we are considering belong to S, all filters, including the generic filter, is a multiple whose elements are all of this form, that is 0, 0, 1, 0. Moreover, apart from the fact that these conditions belong to F, let's suppose that they carry information about F. If that were to be the case, then the condition 0, 1, 0, 0 dominates, is stronger than, and carries more information than the condition 0, 1, 0. So actually, these are information, basically. The other requirements for a filter.
Can I just ask a question here, but something that it's really important for me, and I still struggle to understand. Like, okay, we had the ground model. It must have some properties that allow it, let's say, to be a mini structure as informative as the large situation, right?
Correct.
And then he says, okay, now take this pose set, and this partially ordered set is made up of. I mean, you get to this partially ordered set in the way that we would get to a partially ordered set from the power set, right? Let's say if I have a set with 3 elements and I have a power set with 8, I also get a partially ordered set because, for example, if there are 3 elements, the 3 elements contain all parts which have 2 elements, which contain, so I can actually turn it into a lattice, right? I'm just trying to see, like, when he says, take this partially ordered set, he's talking about the lattice structure of relations of inclusion of parts in this ground model.
Correct.
Right? And then he's saying, okay, and then he talks about information, but information here doesn't refer to, let's say, the what of each subset. He's not asking what is inside. He's saying, given that one thing is included in the other, or that these two things are both part of this third thing, the information concerns
just this lattice structure.
Just the lattice structure, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just the fact that we can include, we can conclude from this relationship that whether we, according to this lattice structure, we can deduce certain things.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's where, I mean, very profound intuition is, right? That he's looking at a different aspect of ordering rather than succession, like Gödel was, to look for information, right?
It's an important observation. You're right. The other requirement for a filter is to only contain compatible conditions. A filter cannot carry contradictory information. For example, the two conditions. So this is like an important information, that if you have a condition called 0, 1, 0 anywhere, you cannot have a condition 0, 1, 1 because they are contradictory. That is information.
Mm-hmm.
From two compatible conditions, we should always be able to place them together in a condition that dominates both. This is another information. For example, 0, 1 and 0, 1, 0. If you have 0, 1, we know that G should contain, because it's a filter, a condition that dominates this. And if we find that condition, then we should be able to find another condition that dominates both of them.
Mm-hmm.
This is what he means by information. The next requirement is the possibility of, the next requirement is the possibility of extending F according to the axiom of choice, whereby you are able to choose for any given condition two incompatible extensions. For example, 0, 1 can be extended to 0, 1, 0 or 0, 1, 1, but only one of the last two can belong to G along with 0, 1. Since they are incompatible, which one is the application of the axiom of choice? A dense subset of a poset is a poset that for every element of the superset poset, it has an element that is stronger. So if D is a dense subset of poset C, then we can state the following, that D is a dense subset if and only if that D is a subset of C, and for every condition that belongs to C, there is a condition that belongs to D such that that condition in D dominates the condition in C. That's a very interesting property, actually. It's a little bit non-intuitive. Because this thing, to me, says that D has to have more conditions than C, yet it is a subset of C.
It's the edge. It's the edge of C. Like if you think of C as like a tree,
right?
D is like
That's
the leaf nodes.
Yeah, or the circumference of a circle.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the outer edges, so that everything there is always dominating everything else. But
right.
yeah.
So basically, this doesn't mean that they are as, so this P2 could dominate a whole bunch of conditions in C.
Exactly. And P2 is part of C also, right?
Part of C.
So
like
being
the edge
dense,
of the circle.
Yeah, being dense just means that whatever information you have, there is a dominating information in D, right?
Exactly. So like a concept of the circle, the border.
Yeah.
The border of a circle is part of the circle, but it's a subset of circle too. So every point in a circle is within that border, or is inside that border, something like that. Now, given any arbitrary filter F in C, the complement of F with respect to C is dense. That is, C minus F is a dense set. This is due to the property D above. If pi 1 is a member of F, then according to D, there must be two incompatible conditions in C that dominates pi 1. But these incompatible conditions cannot be both belonging to F, because since according to the definition of a filter, all elements must be compatible. That it means one of these conditions belongs to C minus F. This proves that C minus F is dense. Badiou calls the complement of a filter F the domination of F, and denotes it as follows. let's term domination a set of conditions such that any condition outside of the domination is dominated by at least one condition inside that domination. But you emphasize that this allows us to develop a structural characterization of the discernibility of a correct part without reference to language. The definition of dense subset D is an axiomatic definition that does not refer to the dictionary of S. Its concept is underwritten by axioms. If D is a dense subset, its axiomatic definition is this. So everything here is like belongings to axiom. There's no formula here. Okay.
Yeah, that seems like the core of it, right? That
that's a
you
very
found.
important thing.
Yeah, with that idea of let's look at the lattice of relations between subsets. Let's find a way to filter this lattice, looking always for these dense structures, which will preserve the most informative aspect of these filters, right? Of this filtering of the lattice. With that way, you found a way to navigate the ground model that is not by coming up with definable parts through formulas.
Without any properties, without referring to any properties of the ground model. You just rely on what axioms define, which is the lattice structure, the inclusion, the belonging, which are all part of axiom.
Yeah. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is actually just for the kind of utilitarian use, like the very specific use we're making of it in the general discussions we've been having, because one of the enigmas in Badiou's use of forcing is right now we have a problem in our approach, or a problem, but an open issue with our approach to organizations and so on, because we want to suggest that reorganizations of a world are informative about that world, right? We were going to use this to discuss a sort of political experimentation where it's not about how you name the world, but it's what information you can get from what sort of reorganization of the world you can do, right? And there is a similar, we might be forcing this, like pushing it a bit too hard, but there is a similar intuition that you learn about the world through organization. In politics, you learn about the world through organization, with this shift from come up with a controllable language with a Godelian style towards learn how to extract information, like learn under which specific conditions you can extract information from the ordering itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The ordering is giving you just a sort of basic organization of the subsets. You're not really asking what is in a subset. You're asking, given whatever is inside of it, I don't necessarily know how to name it. How is it inside others, and what is inside of it, right? So it's kind of focusing on the, let's say, architecture of the situation rather than on the substance of it, exactly. The predicative substance, right?
It's very similar to logics of words as well, and the relationship of the transcendence to the word itself. In that sense, that transcendence, or transcendental, transcendental is giving information about the world appearance without basically making any giving any information about what is in that world.
Yeah.
Right. And we know we know that transcendental is a lattice structure too.
Exactly. That's why I'm trying to push a bit into that direction of discussion, because one of the things that interests us is that there seems to be a very strong relation between how things are composed, and not what, but how things are composed, and what sort of information you can get. That sort of duality between composition and intelligibility, right?
And I think this is important to also include in that this kind of knowledge, I call it phenomenological knowledge or generic knowledge, or does not require any specificity about that world that you don't need to know any properties of that world in order to basically say intelligible things about that world. Kind of reminds me of Dennis's lecture last week or this week, earlier, no, last week. That the one part that he was basically saying what we need is to approach the issue of organization phenomenologically, right?
Yeah.
Which means that we extract information not through what that organization writes in the manifesto or whatever, which is part of the language of that structure.
Exactly. Yeah,
but
that's what I was aiming.
Yeah, how it relates to other objects in the world, which is a lattice structure.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
so this is
it's even, yeah, it has that structure of also being more specific, going from like the set of all possible, let's say, compatible social realities to like more specific social realities that are, you could say, like dominant over the other ones, maybe. I don't know. I'm just thinking like the filter structure seems to be relevant there. Instead of trying to like use existing terminology or concepts that were made for us as individuals, perhaps there's some basically what we call experimentation, which is a way of like filtering certain phenomena impredicatively, right? Without predicates necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's really the nice point, that the three things here, which are there is a lattice structure implicit in a ground model that gives you, let's say, an ordering to look at. There is a way of filtering it, which is where Badiou also associates the fidelity connector, right? Let's take a look at it, at how you can slice that lattice. That seems to be the more active part, right? Because that filtering will have specific conditions of decision, right? The real choice thing that he talks about. Well, if you choose one thing, you cannot choose the other, right? And some internal consistency. So it's like you're substituting a predicative approach to learning about the world, and the filter, like the partial order, substitutes the hierarchy of construction of sets, and the filtering substitutes the predicates, right? Like but they have an analogy, like as counterpoints to each other.
Actually, I think this goes into the difference between qualitative and quantitative approach, because everything we are talking about in terms of gathering information has to do with inclusion and belonging, has nothing to do with what the thing is. So again, coming back to what Badiou is so excited about after Cantor, that it opens up a new way of investigating the world.
Yeah, and again, just to make the proviso that yes, it's quantitative, but it has nothing to do with, let's say, assigning numbers to reality, right? Quantity becomes something more, it's separate, or as we said, order and size are no longer the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, when the sample is like infinitely many.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is, but you emphasizes that this allows us to develop a structural characterization of discernibility of a correct part without reference to language. We read that. So this is the axiomatic part. We went through this. So there are infinitely many dense subsets to C, but denumerably so, as per the size of S. The denumerability of the dense subsets is an important property that helps us prove the existence of generic filter. So now we get to the generic filter. We need to define what generic is in the generic filter. The generic filter is a set. Hence, its definition must be extensional. The definition must also be accessible to the inhabitant. Yet one shouldn't be able to construct this set in S. It should be indiscernible in S. What does it mean for a filter F to be indiscernible in S? When we say F is discernible in S, we are asserting that there is a property in the language of S that names F completely. Using a formula lambda of pi, we are also to separate only those conditions pi in C that belongs to F. Suppose that we have such a lambda that separates F. Now, according to the property D above, for every condition pi in C, there are two incompatible conditions that dominate it. But according to property P2, only one of them belongs to F. So if pi 1 is dominated by P2, pi 2, and pi 3, both of them, and pi 2 and pi 3 are incompatible, then either lambda pi 2 is true or lambda pi 3. This means for every pi belonging to F, there exists a condition rho in C that dominates it. So pi dominated by rho such that rho does not exist in F because rho is in the dense subset. This is the same as saying if lambda discerns a filter F, then the conditions which satisfy not lambda, which are not in F, constitute a dense subset, which is a domination for F. So if F is discernible by lambda, then the domination D is also discernible because it's not lambda. We define a generic filter as a special type of filter that intersects with every dense subset of C, defined in this way. This definition is based on the concept of dense subset, which is axiomatic and does not refer to any element of the language. Yet the inhabitant of S still understands the concept. This is why generic filter is still indiscernible. Inhabitant of S still understands its concept. Why is the generic filter indiscernible? Because there is no property in the language that can describe it, intersecting with every dense subset which exhausts every determination. We ensure that no one property can separate G in C. In other words, for all dense subsets, subset of C, the intersection of that dense subset and G is non-empty, sorry. Here, all the concepts are defined within ontology with no appeal to particular language of S. Actually, I find this quite amazing, how much information we can get about something like S being an organization without even knowing what that organization is.
Mm-hmm.
We, as an inhabitant of S, understand the concept of filter. We understand the concept of a dense subset, the domination, axiomatically, through using the language of ontology. Therefore, the concept of the generic filter, G, owes its definition only to ontology. So this is the definition of generic filter. Generic filter is a subset, we define it as a subset that has one condition with every dense subset in C, and one condition in common. So the next question is, would such a G exist? So far, we have managed to construct a concept for G. While G is comprehensible by the inhabitant of S, it is indiscernible by the language in S. G is a filter that at least has one common condition with every dense subset in C, and thereby S, which makes it a special type of filter, a generic filter. An inhabitant of S could understand this definition, which only uses the language of ontology, and thereby G is not constructed through an intra-situational language. The question that we must now ask is, does G exist? One might find a conceptual reason for such a G not to exist at all. If G is in C, then C minus G could also be in C. And by our definition, it must be a dense subset. So we find a domination for G, which is C minus G, that does not have an intersection with G. So G intersection with C minus G is empty, which is just opposite to this. So therefore, it is impossible for such a G to exist in C and thereby in S. And what is not in S does not exist for the inhabitant of S at all. In what follows, G is shown to exist, but not in S. In fact, it's not the case that G belongs to S. G is a subset of S. But this is not something that is visible to the inhabitant. I find this very important too.
Right, this has to do with even though S is transitive, it doesn't mean every part of S is an element of S, right?
Exactly.
So we're specifying this. The whole point of this filter is that it specifies a part of S that is not belonging to S.
So
and
G
I think
is
that
the subset of. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, yeah.
Oh, I was just adding to what Dennis said. Is absolutely correct. So what we are saying is that if G was a member of C, then G would have been visible to S.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case. G is a subset of C, and subset of C is not visible to S.
Yeah, I think that this is also the reason. I mean, we know that the solution to this is going to be that, well, it belongs to the to S of G, right? To the extended situation. But that, I think that's exactly the point where Kripke thought, aha, so this is the language for possible worlds, right? Because you construct a statement that does have a referent, but you need to condition, not in the technical sense here, but you need to make it contingent on a different world to make it true, right?
Okay. So let's continue. To show the existence of G, according to Badiou, we must assume that we have access to all dense sets. So these are all dense sets in C. Well ordering and the axiom of choice for S guarantees this access and allows one to name these subsets. We then pick one element from each dense subset. So that's the axiom of choice. And this is denumerably so. So P naught, an arbitrary condition, pi 1 from D1, so on and so forth. In this way, that if you take pi naught and then you go to the first dense subset and find a condition that dominates that. How can you find that condition? Because we assume the axiom of choice, and so on and so forth. This gives us a sequence of ordered conditions, which is sequence A. We define G is the filter that is dominated by at least one of the conditions in sequence A. So we find a pi in G if and only if there exists a pi n in this sequence that dominates that condition. G must satisfy P1 and P2. For P1, we must show that given a condition in G, if that condition dominates another condition, that one is also in G. So if there is a P2 in G and P1 is dominated by P2, then P1 is in G. Take a condition P1 or PI, I think. That condition must be dominated with at least one condition in sequence A, say P, cannot even write my reading, pi n. If Pj is dominated by Pi, we know that Pj is dominated by Pn, but according to the definition of G, what is dominated by sequence A according to G, we then have Pj belonging to G because it is a condition that is dominated by a condition within the sequence. So that is for P1. For P2, we want to say a dense subset of a poset is a poset that for every element of the upside, P2, pi1 belonging to G and pi2 belonging to G. If there is a pi3 that dominates both, pi3 belongs to that. Suppose we take two conditions pi I and pi j in G. Now suppose we form a set by making a union out of these two conditions. Based on our assumption in constructing sequence A, we are guaranteed that we can find a condition that dominates Pk. Suppose that condition is Pn, which means that Pk belongs to G. Okay, so we proved P1 and P2. We want to know whether this is a generic filter. We must show that for all D in C, D is a dense subset, there is an intersection. For every dense subset belonging to C and S, we took one condition that dominated G as per our construction of G. That means that there are conditions that belong to both G and every dense subset in C. Okay. So basically, with this way of constructing and choosing G to be in this way, we are showing that it is perfectly reasonable to assume that G exists. We can construct it. Obviously, we don't know what these conditions are. We don't know what G is, but through this procedure, procedurally, we can show the existence of G. This procedure that is performed by the ontologist establishes that G exists, but the ontologist agrees with the inhabitant of S that this generic is not an element of S. Now, can you guys tell me why inhabitant cannot perform these steps? I mean, the only way that I can say he cannot do that because he does not understand the axiom of choice and the axiom of the other axiom.
But
and the only way,
yeah.
I mean, why this thing cannot be performed by inhabitant? This is, I said that earlier that I have this question. And I have that answer that I said, but I'm not sure that answer is a. I'm certainly sure that that's not the answer that you had in mind. I don't know what his answer is, but I'm not sure whether what I said is actually correct. He would agree with this.
Yeah, my intuition here is something like what you call sequence A here is not defined by a formula, right? It's like you said, it's using axiom of choice. to pick these conditions. So you didn't have a formula to extract them. Like it seems like every chain of conditions in the constructible universe, that chain is ruled by like a formula.
Mm-hmm.
Like just like in a filter, just using the whole 20 questions example, right? If you see the sequence as a set of questions, I say, is it alive? Is it a human? Was it born after 1900? Right? This is the sequence. In a constructible universe, the sequence, I mean, you have definable questions like the concept of alive, the concept of born after 1900. That's what is discernible in the universe, right? But if you do this kind of procedure, you're choosing an arbitrary set of conditions that don't necessarily fit into a concept. Like, okay, the concept of Albert Einstein is the sum of the sequences of conditions that would specify Albert Einstein in the universe. So Albert Einstein was, I don't know if he was actually born in the 19th century or 20th, but probably 19th, right?
19,
Yeah. So I say, was he born in the 19th century? Yes or no? Okay, that's the first element of the sequence. Is he, born in Europe? The second sequence. These are, using these concepts, we can construct the concept of Albert Einstein. We can find a filter that specifies precisely this being of all the beings in the universe. We can specify it, right? But this is a well-defined concept. We already have the concept of Albert Einstein. It's discernible. So the question is, how do you construct a filter for something that doesn't have a concept already? So
for example, imagine that you wanna do a game of 20 questions with a communist organization in a conservative world. You would have to include at some point a predicate that has no reference, like that actually refers to the structure of the organization, right?
I get that, but what I don't get is, again, maybe lack of enough clarity in terms of what is it that the ontologist, this outside and inside thing. I mean, why doing this operation needs to be outside, so to speak, the outside looking in. Fact of the matter is ontologist is not outside of anything. There is no inside and outside. There is no outside of math. Outside of math is inside of math.
Yeah, I think that the difference, again, I think that thing I said helps and goes in the direction of what you both are saying. That, for example, I can formulate the principle because from what I understand, the generic filter cannot be a filter inside of M, because, right, if the complement of it's dense and the generic filter intercepts every dense set of M, you get into that problem you were mentioning, right? It always has an element that is outside of every filter in M.
Yeah.
If it has an element that no filter in M, right, that it's always an excess for every filter.
I understand. I mean, I understand this, but I find it a little bit, I'm sure that there is something, but I find it a little bit contingent to define, to narrow inhabitant to someone, to earlier point that Dennis made, that cannot use axiom of choice. Because axiom of choice, I mean, unless you say only ontologists know about what axiomatic principles construct S or the ground model, The inhabitant has no idea. Inhabitant only works with properties, which is fair to assume, right? Like somebody in an organization may not have access to the axioms of the organization, just the rule book of that organization.
Can I read the part here of Burhan Dinsbaki's book on this? He says, well, the generic filter is the set of all conditions whose strength does not exceed at least one of the inquiries constructed in the sequence. Even though the generic filter lies outside of the ground model, its elements and finite subsets are all inside of S. As a generic filter, G is still definable within M because the terms used to define its predicate, dense subset, intersection, conditions, are all definable with respect to the immanence of the ground model itself. The generic filter is definable even though it does not exist. In S, the set G exists only intentionally as a proper class and not extensionally as a set. I think that's where the distinction.
That's very important. I mean, this is a concept, right? This concept means intentional.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the issue is that according to ZFC, we need to be able to define it extensionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is why we have to create naming or the way of naming. That is the extensional part. So he's absolutely correct.
So from the viewpoint of the ground model, we can thus understand the generic filter as being determined by the limit of some sequence of inquiries of increasing strength as the infinite end result of an expanding set of information. The first inquiry of the sequence is pi0 equals pi, is randomly selected, while the nth inquiry is randomly selected from the nth dense subset dn, with the requirement that it can be at least as strong as the preceding inquiry. Each new element adds new information, a set that in the end is meant to be closed and consistent body of information. So that consistent and closed body of information is not extensively seen from inside of S. It can only be intentionally described. I think that this is the way that I think of this is something that happens when I try to teach classes on this. And I say, well, then the general gist of the thing is that, you in these inquiries, you pick something that contradicts the global predicate of everything else you already picked. Sort of just to give the gist of something in predicative.
Okay.
And then people say, of course. So that's how I do politics. I select something that doesn't fit with the predicates I already have. Yeah, that's the intentional description, but it doesn't say anything.
Very good. This is very good. This is very helpful. But now it just completely flips the situation for me, because in this case, how would the ontologist see G extensionally? Because all that the ontologist is doing here is building concept. So I agree. If we define this using intentional extensional, this is only intentional. But look, this intention or proof by concept or definition by concept is also true for the ontologist.
But I think the ontologist, I think that's where the distinction between the thing you said was very important, shows that it's very important, that S is transitive, but that doesn't mean that it contains all the elements of its parts, but it doesn't mean that those elements become themselves parts. If they became parts, I would have predicates for them.
Correct.
But I don't. The ontologist does, because they became parts.
Because what? Because say it again.
Because from the perspective of the ontologist, I have names for those unnamed parts of S.
How? Where?
Because they are caught up now in the filter.
Well, the fact that ontologist is able to build names based on the resources of S, if you mean that, I understand it. But my point is this, that it's as if the way that at least Badiou describes it, again, it is, I'm sure it is metaphoric because it's not mathematical. He is as if that ontologist see things from outside coming in. So it sees the boundary of S, it sees what is not available in S and what is available outside of S. This position, I cannot find a technical term, if you will, or a term within mathematics. What does that mean, even? I mean, I understand that it helps bad use storytelling, but I cannot reconcile it with his method. So again, the only way that I can think of it is that mathematician has a way of thinking about the whole situation axiomatically, whereas the inhabitant doesn't have access to that register of thinking.
Yeah, for example, in page 361 of Being an Event, it says something like the power set of A is not absolute for S. The reason is that for an alpha that belongs to S, if beta is included in A, it is in no way evident that beta belongs to S, right? As we were saying, that is, the part B exists for, it's not evident that the part beta exists for an inhabitant of S. The veridicity of the axiom of the power set in S signifies solely that when alpha belongs to S, the set of parts of A which belong to S is counted as one in S. But from the outside, the ontologist can quite easily distinguish a part of alpha which does not exist in S because it does not belong in S. Right? So the whole thing plays on the fact that there exist subsets that do not belong to S, even though they are part of things that belong in S. Right?
So that is axiom. I mean, ontology knows this. Ontologist knows this not because he has a way to name it. He knows they exist because of the power set or because of the definition of transitive, which are all axiomatic things.
I think that there's a slight difference because the ground model is an infinite thing whose elements contain elements and multiples contain multiples. And the power set in the ground model is a relative thing, meaning it contains all the existing subsets. It doesn't contain all the possible subsets, right? That difference between the existing subsets and the possible subsets, I think that's where all the difference comes in.
Okay, something to think about.
Yeah, for example, yeah, we could go into this, but I think that's the definition that I saw him giving here. That
I'll take a look at it again. Okay, so so here, this procedure that is performed by ontologists, we read that being the subset of S, however, is not perceived as being existence, as having existence for the inhabitant of S. It is an existence for the ontologist, but not for the inhabitant. I think this is from the same passage. So for the ontologist to prove the existence of the indiscernible G, the inhabitant something else must take place. The ontologist must expand S in such a way that G becomes an element of S. So again, here it seems that belonging is the only thing that inhabitant has access to. But to do so, the ontologist must first expand the language of such of S such that it would be possible to name G, because currently that is impossible. We denote this extension of S to contain G as SG. So now it gets into complex stuff. So
this was all the simple part. This was the easy part.
This was the easy part. The real work starts from here. Extending S to SG. At this point, we know G exists for the ontologist who is not bound by the condition of absolute. So this is important. This is another thing. The difference between inhabitant and ontologist is that this absolute thing. That I provided something at the end. We can take a look at it later. On the other hand, for the inhabitant of S, G is definable but non-existent. So this is the intentional extensional aspect that Baki is talking about. The way forward is to provide from within S a way for the inhabitant to name the generic filter. This requires a schema for naming that can be potentially used to name the elements of G. In order to do that, is to define what a name really is and what it consists. We define a name as the following. Name is a multiple. Each name belongs to a nominal rank. There are multiple names in each rank. Each nominal rank is designated by an ordinal. The name multiple consists of pairs, a name of the lower rank and a condition. An empty set is the name of the zero rank. Okay. Combining the above specifications into the definition, we get a name is either at rank 0 a multiple of the kind pi, empty set and pi, where pi belongs to C. So that's rank 0. Which at this is really including at rank 0, including names of this kind for all conditions in C. So that's rank 0. And then in general case is multiple at rank pi or at rank alpha, whatever. There are names of this. So this is a set at this rank of couples of this kind, that the first one is this. So I'm imagining that this is number 1. So this pi prime is really this. So pi 1 is, sorry, this is not that, this is mu. Mu is equal to mu prime. Dennis, is this mu?
Yeah.
Okay.
U prime, right?
Yeah. So imagining this is mu 0 and this is mu 1, this will look like that mu 1 is a set of mu 1, which is this, and all the conditions within pi. So at level 1, right, you have couples of this form that the element, the first element is the name of the previous rank. So in this case, mu 0, mu prime is mu 0, is a set itself, so on and so forth. Is that clear?
Yeah. I think in the second line, it should say mu prime is a name from the previous rank. So
correct.
If whatever rank you're on, -1 to that rank, and then
exactly.
find a name there and put it there, put it in.
Correct. In the above, mu is a name at an arbitrary rank alpha, and mu prime a name at an arbitrary rank beta, alpha and beta being ordinals with alpha greater than beta. Actually, in this case, it's not like alpha -1 or beta or something like that. It's just a previous rank. And pi is an arbitrary condition. Given this definition, the name at each rank is defined using the name at a lower rank. This gives us a hierarchy of names in which a name at a higher rank contains in its definition names as the immediate lower rank. Actually, I say that here, but it's not obvious in this definition. This definition of names is nested definition similar to pure sets, such as von Neumann ordinals. Each set contains as its elements other sets that have, actually it's not pure, it's proper sets. Each set contains as its elements other sets that have already been defined. This nested relation continues till we reach the bottom. At the bottom, we then have only one set, which is the empty set. Names follow the same structure, with the difference that names comprise of pairs of a name that is already defined and a condition that belongs to C. The second step after defining the name in an absolute way and such that both the inhabitant and ontologist comprehend and agree upon is to give the names we build a referential value tied to the indiscernible G. This step requires to work backward. That is, we now work from the supposition of G. The goal of this step is to provide a procedure according to which the inhabitant and ontologist can assign to the names created in the previous step or rank a value depending on whether a name has at least one element in its rank whose condition belongs to G. Let's take the following example. So this is the name at rank 0, and pi belongs to C. In this example, the name mu comprises elements of the form empty set and pi. If in one of these elements the condition pi belongs to G, then we assign the value of set of empty set to the name pi, a mu. Otherwise, the assigned value will be empty set. In other words, this is the way that you define the naming with respect to G is equal either to empty set if there exists a pi in this sequence belonging to mu, where that pi belongs to G. And in general, the definition of the referential value of a name will be as follows. This formula. So the referential value of a name at any rank will be the referential value of mu prime such that the pi in this couple belongs to mu and pi belongs to G. Having said that, in the above definition, the goal is to designate the name mu of the rank alpha with a referential value with respect to G. The name mu has elements of the form mu prime pi, where mu prime is a name of the rank beta, which is a lower rank than alpha. For each pair of such name, it is if its condition belongs to G, then the whole pair resolves to the referential value of the name elements of the pair. This way, the name mu is expanded to a set of referential values of the names of the lower rank. We will then constitute in a single step another situation that the fundamental situation by taking all the values of all the names which belong to S. This new situation is constituted on the basis of the names. It is the generic extension of S. As announced earlier, it will be written of this funny thing. Thus, the generic extension is defined as following. The generic extension is really this. Generic extension is creating names based on elements.
It's a weird thing because it has a very similar feel to Godel,
exactly,
right? Ranks and so on, as you said before, but it's conditional names, right?
Exactly.
Because the names are always, this ranking of names is paired with the lattice structure of the condition.
Exactly. I mean, the genius, I think, here is that, so wait a minute, we can borrow from what Godel did, but use it to weaponize against Godel.
Yeah.
That's the genius of this.
And I think that specifically here, the really technical and complicated part of this for me, which I still don't understand fully, is there is a very specific effect of indexing these names to conditions, right? And now they carry two informations. There is a information concerning the structure of names in the ground model that we already knew, how that, what information that is. But now we can, let's say, borrow the consistency of names valid in S to explore the information that's coming from G, right?
Mhm.
That's the part for me that's really weird. Like,
So the thing, I mean, the way that I understand it is now you have a set. Like these sets are sets of references, not reference. This is just names, a set of names, right? Now, but these names, these are not the actual elements of S. These are just names, bunch of names, whereby we are creating those names based on two things. A, all the elements in S combined with the conditions in S, right? And number two is the fact that some of those conditions, which we don't know which ones, will belong to G. So we are adding, all of a sudden, we are adding bunch of names that some of those names have referential values of 1 and some of them 0. The ones that have referential values of 0 are those names whose in their construction there is a condition that does not belong to G, which again we don't know which ones, and those are the ones that belong. So again, a formulaic definition here without knowing exactly what are the reference here. So in here we create bunch of names. We show that each element, later on we show that each element within S will have a name here. We show that all the elements of G will have a name here without knowing which name belongs to which element. So let's continue. What we have managed to do is to create a new situation we call the extension of S, and denoted by SG. We must now determine these two things, which is what sort of relationship does S has with SG. One, we need to show the extension of S creates a model that is the superset of S. That is, S belongs to SG. S is included in SG. We need to show, number two, the extension of S has the same structural characteristics as S. That is, SG does not contain any ordinals that are not in S. So in order to show that S is included in SG, we have to show that for every alpha that belongs to S, that alpha also belongs to SG. That is, we have a name within SG that is uniquely identifying that element of alpha. But SG is a multiple of names. This means that we must show that for all alpha in S, there exists a name belonging to SG such that that name, mu, is the name for multiple alpha, or the value or the reference of mu in the extension is alpha. Sorry. Where did I go? Okay. But names in SG are not fixed. That's the problem. Since we don't know what the names mu are, in light of this issue, our general strategy must be able to show this. For every element alpha of S, there exists a name such that its referential value is alpha whatever the generic part. For this, we can rely on the belonging of empty set to G, which is absolute, whatever G might be. So all the names of all the pairs of the form mu and empty set, right, should belong to this name or this generic extension, whatever G might be. For an arbitrary element alpha belonging to S, the canonical name is defined as follows. The name of alpha, mu of alpha, is mu of beta and condition empty set, where beta belongs to alpha. This is very interesting. I mean, if you look at this, this is taking just the opposite of, where is it? Oops. Opposite of this, right? In this case, it's saying that in the hierarchy of names, which look like, again, I lost. In the hierarchy of names, which look like this, right? Now, instead of creating the hierarchy horizontally, and I go vertically, create hierarchies horizontally, I go now vertically for all the names that condition is empty set. So for example, at this level, this pi, one of them at rank 0, one of these conditions could be empty set. So this name actually looks like empty set and empty set. So that's the name of the empty set. Empty set belonging to S will need to have a name in generic extension. What is its name? Its name is at rank 0 for the name empty set as the name of the name and empty set as the name of the as the actual condition. So you want to know in generic extension, this, what is the name of the empty set? It's the name that is empty set in the first position and empty set in the second position. And the same thing for any of the names, any of the elements alpha. This form of the name for an arbitrary element alpha of S is correct, an absolute name. It is correct due to the definition of the name, and it is absolute because it relies on the names of the previous level that have already been defined, and an absolute condition which is empty set.
Yeah.
Now, and this is the crux of the affair, the referential value of the canonical name mu alpha is alpha itself, whatever the supposed generic part. We always have R of generic mu alpha is equal to alpha, right? These canonical names invariably name the multiple of S to which we have constructively associated them. Constructively. We know that RG of mu of alpha is this. We can say that because the canonical name mu alpha is a set of pairs like this, and we know that because this belongs to G. This means that this referential value will be the set of the referential value of RG mu beta. But since mu beta is itself a canonical name for beta, then the referential value of the latter canonical name is beta itself. This simply means that the referential value for alpha is a set of all betas that belong to alpha. But that is alpha itself, because alpha is the count as one of everything that belongs to alpha. But what this means is that for every alpha in S, we are able to find a name in SG, and this shows us what have set out to prove. Amazing.
It really is amazing.
Do you want to continue?
Now that I see, I think there's only the two of us, and I think John is still here as well, but everyone else had to go. So I wonder if we shouldn't. I mean, everyone can see the end of that part in the video, and perhaps if you're up for it, we could just start next meeting with this last couple of discussions, which also lead to the more general questions, and then they pick up from there.
Yeah, I'm all for it. It's 9 o'clock. It's almost.
Yeah, let's do that then. Is that okay, John?
That's great. Thank you so much, Reza. That was an amazing presentation. Really helped
Thank you.
clarify a lot of stuff. So thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thanks for listening, and see you guys next week.
Yeah, it will be good also because I really want to think a bit more about, let's say, how do you what's the conceptual kind of backbone, of this way of constructing the ranking of names and the way that names are connected to conditions. Like, all of that seems like part of the. I mean, one thing that your presentation made very clear to me is that coming up with the intentional description of the generic multiple is like the easy part. Coming up with a language such that this multiple becomes the referent of your names, the real referent of those names, that's the hard part, right?
That's the hard part, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you don't have that, you have a mysticism.
Yeah, and the harder part is to say that anything that has veracity in the ground model has veracity in SG.
Yeah, because I think those are the two. This really is what makes the whole thing so innovative, because if you stop at the first part, this intentional affirmation, well, we have other means of saying that. Look, there is something common and impredicative in a situation. You could make that claim out of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then there is a second version, which is to say, the second step, which is to say, it's true that from certain positions or from certain ways, you can arrive at something new, but we also know that as a sort of almost fanatic position, where I'm not saying that I'm trusting certain things on faith, I'm saying that things you don't recognize exist for me.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I look at your organization and I just see a bunch of people. I can describe the world and explain you guys meeting, but you say that something is going on there that's special. You're not just another group, it's a political thing, but that's all you can say, right? You're a smaller point of view than mine. And that also exists. But the third idea, which is to say, not only can this new perspective appear, but it includes everything you can say from the outside. I can say more than you can say. That's the novel thing, right? Like still can,
provided that you can extend the situation with the new thing.
Yeah, exactly. To say that this new thing includes the old, but doesn't includes the old, but still has the power to say something new, right? The combination of the two is what makes it different.
You retain or you preserve the paradigm of veracity of the old one.
Yes.
But in the new one, you can prove or you can say things that you couldn't say in the old one.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think it's politically, it's very nice, the difference, because for sometimes you see the kind of trade-off. The more we can describe what we're doing as something singular and new, the less we can talk about other things, right? So you can talk about how special some political movement is, but the language you use to describe how special you are, it is a poor language to talk about everything else. Right? And I think Badiou is putting an extra condition on something being generic, which is something he says all the time, right? It's not enough that it's exceptional, it's common and exceptional.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the point is that its exceptionality is that it doesn't have any exceptions.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't have any particularity that we can use in order to define it.
But you see, like, how do we usually think this? Oh, it has no particularity, therefore it's kind of, usually, I mean, this is the classical way of thinking about this dialectic approach, which is to say it's a negative relation between predication and negativity, right? In the sense that it exceeds predication because it negates predicates. And for Badiou, you exceed predication, like negativity is an effect of richness.
Exactly.
It's too many predicates.
It's not lack, but excess.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't get to the common by removing predicates and staying with the unpredictable or the impredicative, right? You arrive at the impredicative because you connected too many things, not too little things, right? I think that's totally new. That's, I think, what he calls an affirmative dialect, right? You want negation, you want negativity, yeah, but negativity is actually an effect of affirmation and not something you strive directly towards, right?
It is generic because it is maximal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it becomes easier to see why something generic, something that has this, let's say, position of negativity in this more classical dialectical sense, why it can have a claim to being a better perspective on the world, because it contains the language to talk about the old world, right? It doesn't relinquish that in order to say something exceptional or to. It's a consequence of maximality rather than direct negativity, right? If you remove all predicates in order to arrive at this core and a sort of kind of St. John of the Cross kind of, you know, I will go beyond every predicate to arrive at something absolute. The very process of reaching the absolute makes you lose the means to talk about the world, right? Whereas for Badiou, you don't need to choose between the two. The maximalist approach will guarantee that the very same thing that takes you towards something true also enriches your capacity to talk about the world, right? It really is different.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Well, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Let's pick it up then next week.
All right.
See you, John. See you, Reza.
Take care, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.